Hello. This video is for the IXL activity titled Identify Independent and Dependent Variables. The three-character code for this activity is November 55. And at the time of this recording, this activity can be found at A1.Q.3. So as the title suggests, we're going to be talking about independent and dependent variables. We'll be identifying those. Let's first do a little bit of review about what are independent and dependent variables. I have a table over here that I swiped from our textbook lesson, so it might look familiar. There are several different ways to describe the variables of a function, and we have a table here in which the first column, at the top of it, we have independent variable, and in the second column, we have dependent variable. Well, all the words underneath it, underneath each of these terms, are just another way of describing them. So another way to describe the independent variable is we might be talking about the x values, or we could call it the domain. We could also call it the input, especially whenever we're talking about functions. We talk about inputs and outputs of functions. And then also we might just refer to them as x. And likewise with the dependent variable, whenever we talk about it, we could refer to the y values. We could talk about the range. We could also call them the outputs. And then finally, we have f of x, and f of x is pretty much just like y. So if you want to think about it, we have x values and y values, and respectively, the x values represent our independent variables, and our y values represent our dependent variables. Over on the right side of the page here, I have a little diagram. I use this even to this day. I quite often picture this in my head whenever I have to determine what is the independent variable and what is the dependent variable. Well, I know that my independent variables are the x values because if I take the capital I can just hang the top of the I onto the x-axis, and that helps me remember that the independent variables are my x values. And the capital D, well, the vertical line in the capital D, well, I could connect that to the vertical y-axis here, and that helps me remember that the dependent variables are indeed the y values. So let's go ahead and read our first question, and then we'll start talking about how to identify the independent and the dependent variables. So Roger is purchasing tickets to go on rides at the Morgan County Fair. The number of rides he can go on is dictated by how many tickets he purchases. R being the number of rides that Roger can go on. T is the number of tickets that Roger purchases. Which of the variables is independent and which is dependent? Well, we know that whenever we solved equations in the past, we would have like y equals, say, 3x plus 5, and they tell us to evaluate whenever x equals 6. So we plug that x value in to find out what the y value is. So we could say that our input, or our x values, determine what our outputs, or our y values are. So one thing is determining another. So let's apply that to Roger and his trip to the fair. I think it's a fair, indeed it is. So which one's causing which? We have the number of rides he can go on and the number of tickets that he purchases. Well, hopefully you're thinking to yourself, well, the number of tickets that he purchases determines how many rides that he can go on. So we'll go ahead and I like to use an arrow of one to the other. So which one causes what? Well, we have the number of tickets that he purchases determines how many rides that he can go on. So it's the independent variable that determines what the dependent variable is. So we see that T is the independent variable. It's the one doing the causing, or the x value, or the inputs. We input how many tickets he purchases, and the output is how many rides he can go on. So in this case, we realize that this is our x values. These are our y values, and likewise, that means if this is the x value, it's the independent variable, and if this is the y value, then that would be our dependent variable. So we're looking for t is the independent variable, t is the independent variable, good, and r being the dependent variable. Looks like everything in the first answer here checks out, so we'll go ahead and select the first answer. So that's pretty much how we'll do each of these. Read the problem, determine which one's affecting which one's causing the other, and then from there, we'll go ahead and determine which one's our independent variable and which one's our dependent variable. Next slide. Bobby is making apple turnovers for his friends. The number of turnovers he can make is determined by how many apples he has at home. So it's determined by how many apples he has at home. So the number of apples that he has at home seems to be determining the number of turnovers that he can make. So one's causing the other. So T is the number of turnovers that Bobby can make, number of turnovers that he can make. This is going to be our Y value, right? And the number of apples that Bobby has at home, that's our X value, because the number of apples that he has at home is determining just how many turnovers that he can make. So we're looking for A is the independent variable, X is the independent variable. So A is the independent variable. Looks like it's going to be the first answer here. And T is the dependent variable. Indeed it is. So we'll go ahead and select once again the first option. In the next question, Heather is hosting a potluck dinner for her book club. The more book club members who attend, the more chairs she will need. So what's causing what? Well, apparently the number of people that come over, the number of book club members that show up, is going to determine how many chairs that she has. So the number of those who attend, let's go ahead and I'll read down here the M and the C. M equals the number of members who attend the potluck. Well, that's the number of people that come, right? That's what's causing it. So it's our X value, which we know is our independent variable. And that's going to determine the number of chairs that Heather will need. So that's going to be the Y value, also known as our dependent variable. So we're looking for M is the independent variable. Right there we have it, M, independent variable. And C is our Y value, which is our dependent variable. So on all three of our first problems here, turns out to be that it is indeed the first selection. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide here. The organizers of a large rock concert must follow fire safety regulations regarding the capacity of the arena. The maximum number of tickets sold is limited by the capacity of the arena. So is it the number of tickets they sell that determines the capacity? Well, if they sold 1,000,000 tickets, does all of a sudden the arena hold 1,000,000 people? No, it does not. It's the capacity of the arena that's going to determine the number of tickets that can be sold. So let's go ahead and look at T as the maximum number of tickets sold. And we're determining this got the arrow going to it. So we know that's our Y value, which means that's going to be our dependent variable. And it's the capacity of the arena. It's going to be our X value, also our independent variable, because it is the capacity of the arena that determines how many tickets can be sold. So in this case, the correct answer is C, because they want to know what is the independent variable. Second question on this slide, Jeremiah is purchasing tickets to go on rides at the Jackson County Fair. The number of rides he can go on is dictated by how many tickets he purchases. Well, this sounds kind of like another problem that we had just recently about the other one was a different county fair. So both of them are county fairs, but nonetheless, which one determines which? So R is the number of rides that he can go on. T is the number of tickets that he purchases. Well, the number of tickets that he purchases is going to determine how many rides he can go on. So we know that the T is our X value. The R is going to be our Y value. Or another way to say this is that our value of T, the number of tickets purchased, is the independent variable because it's the one doing the causation or the one affecting the other. The number of tickets that he purchases affects how many rides he can go on. So T is going to be our independent variable. R is going to be our dependent variable. So they want to know which one's the dependent variable. Well, that looks like it's going to be R. I'm actually started looking for a D. I saw the D over here. I'm looking for a D in the answer. No, wait a second. We're showing the number of rides he can go on with the variable R. A couple more questions here. Claire is using homegrown cucumbers to make pickles. The number of pickles she can make is determined by how many cucumbers she has on hand. Well, that makes sense, right? She's going to go make pickles. How many is she going to make? Well, it all depends upon how many she has. So the number of pickles that she has, this is going to be our X value, also known as our independent variable, because it is determining how many cucumbers that she can make. So that becomes the dependent variable. So in this case, the independent, oh, I got that backwards, don't I? Almost switched them around. So the dependent variable is P, the independent variable is C, and they want to know which one's the dependent variable, and it looks like that is the variable P for the number of pickles that she can make. A small apple orchard hires fruit pickers to harvest their crop. The more fruit pickers they hire, the more apples they can harvest each day. So which one affects which? Is it the number of apples that they can harvest each day is determined how many pickers they hire? No, it's actually the other way around. It's the number of pickers that they hire is going to determine how many apples they can harvest each day. So the number of apples harvested each day, that sounds like our second part, the part that's being affected. Let's see what F is, the number of fruit pickers hired. So it looks like the number of fruit pickers hired is going to affect the number of apples that are harvested each day. So our independent variable, the number of fruit pickers hired, is determining what our dependent variable is, which is the number of apples harvested each day. Let's see which one they're looking for. Be very careful. Pay close attention to the instructions. Are they asking for the independent variable or the dependent variable? So here they're looking for the independent variable. So that's going to be the value of F. So we'll go ahead and circle that one there. All right, so that pretty much concludes all of my examples that I have for the IXL activity, identify independent and dependent variables. Now, go level up your learning.